Sometime in the early 80s, probably when I was about 12 or 13, I was living in Japan on an Air Force base, Misawa Air Force Base, with my family, and my dad and stepmother decided we would go watch the movies. So we went um, to a Japanese movie theater to see some modern film, and I forget which one it is, but before we could watch that film, there was a double feature, and we found out that before the movie, there was an old film called Rear Window, some old Alfred Hitchcock movie with Jimmy Stewart. So my dad turned to me and said, "Well, would you like to sit through this old movie first before we watch the film we had originally intended to see?" And I was hesitant at first because back in those days, I was not interested in watching, old movies. But I hesitantly decided, yes, let's watch this movie, and I was mesmerized by it. I, like I say, to this day, I can't even remember what the original movie was that we went to see because I absolutely adored Rear Window. There's just something cozy about the whole, setting it in one apartment, watching your neighbors in this courtyard and seeing their little lives. And it was just and it was suspenseful too, of course. And it really opened a lot of doorways when it comes to watching movies for me. And because of that experience and because of how great the film is, it's my number one favorite movie of all time. So, some time back, Sight and Sound magazine came out with their list of, the greatest movies of all time. And Alfred Hitchcock's Vertigo was ranked, as usual, ahead of Rear Window. Of course, both films are sort of mystery thrillers starring Jimmy Stewart. And I'm going to go into a little discussion or analysis, if you will, of these two films with some minor spoilers ahead. I would hope that you've seen both movies before you listen to this. It's not going to make much sense to you anyway if you haven't. But one of the reasons why many view Vertigo as clearly superior is because they describe it as a deeper and more profound film than Rear Window. After all, Vertigo tackles themes of lost loves and obsession. And Rear Window, on the other hand, is seen as more light and breezy and humorous by comparison. I believe the real reason why Vertigo is more highly regarded, though, really attributed to the fact that it has a very serious tone. And as, of course, it has shocking developments and a very unexpected conclusion as well. So, when a movie ends in a kind of a profound way, that then oftentimes critics take that film a little more seriously. And to go along with that, of course, the cinematography and the music is quite beautiful. I mean, the colors are just lush. And of course, Jimmy Stewart gives a really fascinating portrait of an obsessed man who's in grief, but at the same time obsessed, with his lost love, and as well as, of course, you know, having to deal with his, fear of heights. But Rear Window is about a man who believes one of his neighbors is a murderer, and in an effort to solve the mystery, his somewhat rocky romantic relationship ends up growing closer. So he ends up growing a lot closer to his, girlfriend, played by Grace Kelly, and it's a funny, highly entertaining suspense thriller, and of course, it has a really satisfying conclusion, and it all takes place in one set. And like I say, it's a much lighter, sort of more fun film than Vertigo. Therefore, all these factors compared, contrast, all add up to Vertigo being a deeper and more profound film, right? Wrong. And I'm about to make my case. Rear Window is way deeper than many actually realize. Every courtyard neighbor being watched by Jimmy Stewart from his apartment represents what his life might become. You have happy couples, you have unhappy couples, you have single people who are very lonely, Miss Lonely Hearts, for example, or the piano player who gets drunk every night and frustrated. And the reason why this is important is because the lead character, Jimmy Stewart, has his own doubts about his own relationships with his girlfriend. And so he looks out in the courtyard and he sees all these different lives, and he could have any part of their lives. Like he could be the happy husband, or he could be an unhappy bachelor, or he could be a happy bachelor. Um, Among other things, Rear Window also explores voyeurism as Jimmy Stewart becomes obsessed with viewing his neighbors. And so obsessed that he becomes convinced that he's witnessed a murder. In fact, you can't convince him he's wrong about this. Even when a detective has all these clues that seem to indicate there is no murder, Jimmy Stewart believes he's right and dismisses all evidence to the contrary. And so, what's interesting about this is themes of voyeurism and especially confirmation bias are more relevant today than they ever were when this movie was released in 1954. When Jimmy Stewart and Grace Kelly actually become disappointed that a murder might not have actually happened, we realize we are just as guilty of voyeurism and confirmation bias and imagining the absolute worst of our neighbors as they were in the film. And we're actually kind of crestfallen to discover, gee, maybe the neighbor didn't actually kill his wife. So the thing about Vertigo, I feel like Vertigo is Hitchcock's commentary about one man's grief, Jimmy Stewart in that movie, and his obsession to recapture the love that he lost, Madeline. And it's fascinating, and we can understand it, at least to a point. But most of us wouldn't necessarily have taken it as far as Jimmy Stewart does in Vertigo, right? I mean, he absolutely goes crazy. He starts dressing this lady who looks just like her, wants to dress her up just like her, and he wants to recreate her. Again, really, really interesting, really intriguing, makes for a really thrilling and suspenseful and uncomfortable film. But we're kind of on the outside looking in there, ironically, because we can identify somewhat with Jimmy Stewart, but we're not really him. We probably wouldn't take it as far as he did. On the other hand, Rear Window is Hitchcock's commentary about us, each and every one of us, reflecting on our own relationships, our voyeuristic desire to view the lives of other people. I mean, look at all the reality shows out there: Bachelor, Bachelorette, the Desperate Housewives of so and so. We're very interested in seeing how other people live, sometimes to make ourselves feel better. And sometimes we even hope to see people not behaving themselves or, or, or bringing out the worst in humanity. Hopefully, we're also looking forward to seeing the best out of humanity, but we have that sort of that darkness. I think all of us have this little darkness inside of us that kind of looks forward to seeing the tragedy of other lives. Maybe not bad tragedy, but seeing people argue and fight. I love The Amazing Race. It's my favorite reality competition show. But let's face it, the show also likes to see people arguing with each other. Couples arguing with each other, and they tend to become popular to watch. So, in other words, the thing about Rear Window is it's kind of a mirror into our own soul, and it's not always pretty. And so when I think of which one of these two movies is deeper, how is Rear Window not at least as deep as Vertigo? Vertigo is about an individual that we sympathize with, maybe, but we also kind of become frustrated with. He also makes us a bit uncomfortable because he's doing things that we wouldn't do. But Rear Window is much more about us. You, me. It's the reason, voyeurism is the reason we watch movies and enjoy them so much. So, not only is Rear Window my favorite film of all time, but I believe it's a much deeper, much more profound film, but disguised as a highly entertaining and very fun thriller.